Good evening from the State of Kuwait. Welcome to the 7 o'clock news for Friday, the 16th of January 2015. I am Dani Badran with the news headlines. Representative of His Highness the Emir attends the inaugural ceremony of Bishop Ghattas Hazim as Metropolitan of Baghdad, Kuwait and dependencies. Hala February 2015 festival celebrates the naming of His Highness the Emir as a humanitarian leader in Kuwait as a humanitarian center by the UN. The Syrian border town of Kobani comes under new heavy offensive from the international coalition airstrikes. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Paris as he is expected to continue nuclear talks with his Iranian counterpart. Hello and welcome. Representative of His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah and Deputy Minister of the Emiri Diwan Affairs Sheikh Ali Al-Jarrah Al-Sabah has attended the inaugural ceremony of Bishop Ghattas Hazim as Metropolitan of Baghdad, Kuwait and dependencies. The ceremony was held yesterday evening at the Greek Orthodox Church in Salwa area. Addressing the ceremony, Metropolitan Ghattas highlighted the Kuwait's historical role for achieving renaissance in the Gulf region, saying the country embraces human endeavors to realize development. He said as part of its Arab responsibilities, Kuwait has set up several institutions for supporting urban projects in all Arab countries, pointing out the country's support to Lebanon at the time of war and stressed Kuwait's role in helping the Syrian people. Meanwhile, Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, Patriarch John X Yazigi also addressed the occasion, greeting His Highness the Emir and expressed appreciation over his support, wishing further peace for Kuwait and its people. His Highness the Emir's representative was offered a commemorative gift on this occasion. Kuwait has called on the United Nations Security Council to assume its responsibility and take the essential steps to resume the Middle East peace process. In his keynote speech during the Security Council's meeting last night on the Middle East situation, Kuwait's permanent delegate to the UN, Ambassador Mansour Ayad Latebi, said the Palestinian issue has been yet unsolved, although 6 decades have passed and several resolutions were taken in this regard. He noted that such resolutions did not come into effect due to Israel's hard stance, as it rejected frankly and flagrantly the implementation of resolutions of international legitimacy. Ambassador Al-Atabi then commended the European Parliament's decisions to recognize the Palestinian state, describing the move as supporting to the efforts aiming at putting an end to the Israeli occupation. Hala February 2015 festival kicked off today, celebrating the naming of His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah as a humanitarian leader and Kuwait as a humanitarian center by the UN. Various sectors of the Kuwaiti society eagerly awaited the festival that brings happiness to the state every year, where the Kuwaiti nationals and expatriates celebrate this joyous occasion that represents an important part of Kuwait's history and bright image. The National Council for Culture, Arts and Letters organized a seminar at the National Library of Kuwait discussing the humanitarian role of the Kuwaiti leadership and the state of Kuwait. The seminar hosted a number of famous figures who gave their speeches on such a significant issue, which is a source of pride to the nation and its people. Hiba Abdurrahman was at the National Library and has this report.
The director of the International Organizations Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jassim Limbaraki, said that Kuwait provided under His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah's directions a lot to the world and spread the good hand to humans in Asia, Africa, and around the world. His speech came during a seminar entitled His Highness the Emir, a Humanitarian Leader, Kuwait is an International Humanitarian Center, hosted by the National Council for Culture, Arts and Letters, NCCAL, within the cultural events of the 21st Grain Cultural Festival.
It's quite obvious that in the light of events which took place for the last year or two. We did His Highness the Emir in his capacity as head of the state, and it goes back. During a time, His Highness drove along with the leadership of Kuwait, with the government, drove if I may say, the plan or the strategy of Kuwait to enhance participate positively in the international field.
Al-Mubaraki said that Kuwait is part of coherent international community as countries cannot live isolated as separated islands, stressing that the international cooperation would maintain its economic and political security in a broad sense. He noted that Kuwait also contributed to achieve the Millennium Development Goals (MDGs), which is a noble goal and part of the international system. For her part, the political science professor at Kuwait University, Dr. Nadal Mtawa, explained the concept of humanitarian intervention through humanitarian aid and the protection of citizens, and to respond to public opinion, pointing out that the nature of the relationship of Kuwaiti international community allowed it to the role of human capital and selected for humanity.
My speech will be different today. It's about the humanitarian aid. It's about choosing Kuwait as the capital of humanitarian aid in the world. The choice by the United Nations, of course, and His Highness the Emir as a leader of the humanitarian effort. My paper will use the tools of international relations. It will use the theory of international organizations to shed light on how this decision was made, the history of Kuwait in international organizations, and the role of Kuwait being part of the international scene, and the choice of the humanitarian card to play lately. And after that, during the 60s and 70s, how Kuwait maintained its place internationally, how Kuwait was a member of the Security Council in '79, and the role of that membership into paving the way for Kuwait today to become a leader of the humanitarian aid.
The seminar expanded for the next day, hosting other significant personnel, as Dr. Hilal Sayir, the head of the Red Crescent Society, Ibrahim Saleh, the managing director of Zakat House, along with other important figures. Today's seminar, which is part of the 21st Grain Cultural Festival, is the least that we can offer to celebrate the honoring of His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Jaber Al Sabah by the United Nations as a humanitarian leader, which is considered a civilized testimony for Kuwait and Kuwaitis. From the National Library of Kuwait, I am Hiba Abdurrahman, reporting for English News.
Thank you,
the
Heba.
Director of the
The
International
contested Syrian border town of Kobani came under heavy bombardment from coalition airstrikes today, with multiple explosions that could be heard along with large plumes of smoke that could be seen from the Turkish side of the border. The U.S.-led forces launched 11 airstrikes, each in Syria and Iraq since Wednesday, targeting the so-called Islamic State fighters, equipment and buildings. The IS fighters launched an assault on the town on September, occupying nearly half of it and capturing some 300 Kurdish villages nearby. However, the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimates the Kurds now control roughly 80% of Kobani. The violence came a day after the third batch of Peshmerga soldiers departed from Erbil in Iraq for Kobani to fight alongside Syrian Kurds against the IS group. Arab League endorses new Palestinian move to represent a new draft resolution at the United Nations Security Council calling to end the Israeli occupation by late 2017. More in the following report by Fatma Abdul Karim.
Palestinians have decided a new move towards the United Nations Security Council again, to represent a new draft resolution, this time to be redrafted by a committee of the Arab states. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said in an extraordinary Arab foreign ministers meeting that they will take the move again, confirming that the resolution will call on Israel to end its occupation over 1967 borders by late 2017 and reach a final settlement of the conflict within a year.
We want to go to the UN Security Council again. We suggested and hoped for the formation of an Arab committee to discuss and agree on the draft and to present it to the Security Council while we committed to the committee's decisions.
The Arab foreign ministers also endorsed the Palestinian diplomatic plan seeking to convince current Security Council members of voting in favor of the resolution. The diplomatic attempt will be led by an Arab group of foreign ministers and ambassadors. The major concern over the U.S. veto remains valid, though, and worries the Palestinian leadership.
Regardless of the U.S. veto, the position of the U.S. is clearly biased to the occupation and covers its crimes. Therefore, we are moving on to test the political will of the international community in this matter.
Besides the new attempt at the Security Council, the Palestinians said they will continue to seek more international recognition in international organizations. With the status quo, Palestinians believe only a binding UN resolution will bring Israel to recognizing the Palestinian state. Meanwhile, there should be more to come on the front of the confrontation with Israel in the International Criminal Court. Fatma Abdul Karim, Kuwait TV, Ramallah, Palestine.
Thank you, Fatma. On the other hand, the United Nations demanded that Israel unlock millions of dollars in taxes it collected from the Palestinian Authority and froze as a penalty in response to their applying to join the International Criminal Court in breach of the Oslo Accords to sue Israel. UN Assistant Secretary General claimed to the UN Security Council that the freeze of about $127 million imposed on January 3rd was in violation of the Oslo Accords, calling on Israel to immediately resume the transfer of tax revenues. The UN Security Council was meeting to discuss the Middle East after last month voting down a unilateral Palestinian Authority resolution demanding statehood and the Israeli withdrawals. The UN's criticism joins the bandwagon after the US and European Union already slammed Israel's move, with both parties remaining notably silent regarding the PA application to the ICC that triggered the Israeli response. Iranian and U.S. sources said UN Secretary of State John Kerry and his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Jawad Zarif were expected to meet in Paris for talks on Iran's nuclear policy. Kerry met with Zarif earlier this week in Geneva for what U.S. officials called substantive talks on Tehran's nuclear program. Iran and 6 world powers, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China, have renewed their quest for an elusive nuclear deal after negotiators failed for the second time in November to meet a self-imposed deadline. The major powers hope to persuade Iran to curb its nuclear program, which the West suspects may seek to develop atomic weapons in exchange for a gradual easing of economic sanctions. Earlier in the day, Kerry held talks with French President François Hollande and Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius to express America's solidarity with the French people after last week's deadly terrorist attacks. France was still on high alert as an armed man equipped with a military weapon took an unconfirmed number of hostages at the post office in the town of Colombes. Earlier in the day, Paris police evacuated the Gare de l'Est train station after the bomb threat as the authorities pressed on with efforts to prevent new violence after last week's terrorist attacks. As there have been numerous false alerts across the country, French Interior Minister said that 12 suspects have been placed in custody amid continuing searches for suspected extremists. The minister said the suspects are believed to be linked to the gunman who attacked a kosher supermarket in Paris last week. He added that France's national security alert system was still in force with 122,000 police and military forces deployed across the country. As European investigators moved on a broad front to sweep up suspected radicals, Belgian authorities launched an operation overnight to dismantle a terrorist cell and logistics network behind it. According to the authorities, the police moved in on a hideout used by suspected extremists in the eastern city of Verviers, killing 2 suspects and wounding and arresting a third. At a news conference in Brussels, a Belgian federal magistrate also said that the police had arrested 13 people as the ongoing investigation showed their intention to kill several policemen in the streets. Meanwhile, in Germany, the police arrested 2 Turkish men suspected of having links to an organization supporting the so-called Islamic State militants and other radical groups fighting in Syria. The head of Indonesia's Henry Sulistyo Search and Rescue Agency said today that 1 more body was recovered from the site of the Air Asia plane crash, bringing the total number of recovered bodies to 51. Sulistyo said that search teams identified what they believe it is the aircraft cockpit, an engine, and some passenger seats that may still contain bodies. Meanwhile, Indonesia's Transport Safety Authority said yesterday that there was progress with the analysis of the retrieved flight data recorders. An exhibition and a series of lectures on the history of Kuwaiti-Indian relations kicked off as part of the 21st Grain Cultural Festival organized by the National Council for Culture, Arts and Letters, held at Kuwait's National Library. The event focused on bilateral ties since the mid of 18th century up until Kuwait's independence in 1961. While the exhibition displayed many art crafts that represented the existing ties between Kuwait and India, back then the lectures meanwhile pointed out to the deep historical connection between India and Kuwait, which was evident in many archaeological findings, and also touched on the political, trade, cultural ties that have been enjoyed by the 2 countries for more than 3 decades. Here's more on the event in this report by Salem Al-Kandari.
Kuwaiti-Indian history of relations since the middle of the 18th century up until Kuwait's independence were presented in an exhibition and lectures held at Kuwait's National Library.
I'm here in Kuwait for the festival organized by the National Library and the National Council for Arts and Culture, and they have invited me to speak on 200 years of relations, historical relations between India and Kuwait, starting from mid-18th century. And I have traced this long relationship, maritime history, trade, culture between the 2 countries, between the 2 peoples, involving trade in pearls, which is Lulu, then dates, which were brought from neighboring areas, then horses, and many other products to India which were in great demand, and they are still in great demand. But in return, the Kuwaiti traders would bring most of the other things which they needed here, and also for exports, not only to Iran, to Iraq, to neighboring countries in the Arabian Peninsula, but also to Central Asia. The timber would go right up to Kazakhstan, Russia, Chechnya, so on and so forth. So Kuwait was the hub, the center for trade between India and East Africa and much of the Indian Ocean region. And this has left lasting impressions about the Kuwaiti life in cities like Bombay, where they opened offices and then a large number of Kuwaiti merchants stayed there in a famous street called Muhammad Ali Street, where they had offices and they also had their families, children, school, masjid, cultural programs, so on and so forth. And much of the west coast also, from Gujarat to Kerala. Large number of Kuwaiti merchants actively traded because they used to bring back from India many of the things, from textiles to wood and basic things which they needed here.
As for the nature of the items that were traded between Kuwait and India, Kuwait exported dates, pearls, and Arabian horses to the Indians, while India provided spices, fabrics, and vessel-making materials to Kuwaitis. This event today is about the strong relationships between India and Kuwait in the past history since the 18th century until the liberation. There was a lot of trade going on and strong relations between the two countries. From Kuwait National Library, this is Salim Kandiri reporting for the English News. Kuwaiti Indian.
Thank you, Salim. For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. And before we end, here is a quick reminder of today's headlines. Representative of His Highness the Emir attends the inaugural ceremony of Bishop Ghattas Hazem as Metropolitan of Baghdad, Kuwait and dependencies. Hala February 2015 festival celebrates the naming of His Highness the Emir as a humanitarian leader and Kuwait as a humanitarian center by the United Nations. The Syrian border town of Kobani comes under new heavy offensive from the international coalition airstrikes. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrives in Paris as he is expected to continue nuclear talks with his Iranian counterpart.